Hi, hello. Very good evening. So today we'll go ahead with our 24th live session, right? So textbook discussion. Topic is casting defects, right? Casting defects from Phillips, 11th edition, page 337. 337, right? So we'll start with a quote and then we'll proceed with various casting defects, the causes of casting defects, the classification, the reasons behind the casting defects and how to overcome them, right? So it's simple. We'll categorize them into three. And at the end of live session, I'll give you a table format and I'll make sure that we cover all the casting defects, the causes of casting defects, how to overcome those casting defects, right? So that's very important. And also I'm planning to show you some images in form of soft copies. We have another device here, so I'll show you simultaneously the images wherever appropriate, and we'll try to forward the discussion accordingly, right? So I actually tried the same this morning also, and I think it's all set, right? So very good evening once again. So we'll first go ahead with a beautiful quote. The best preparation for tomorrow is doing your best today, as said by Jackson Brown. So that's the best starting point we can have here, right? So the best preparation for tomorrow is doing your best today. So hope you have hard copies of Phillips, and also make sure that you have a notes, a pen and a highlighter, right? So casting defects, we have different types of casting defects, and the reasons are enormous, right? We can have a variation in temperature of casting, a variation in pressure, or it can be either because of some issues pertaining to wax pattern. So there are n number of reasons for defective castings, right? So we'll just go ahead with various causes of casting defects, right? If you're following 11th edition of Phillips, you can refer a page number 337, right? So very good evening, Neetu, Shaggy, hi Ramesh, Subhasini, hi Deepak, good evening Kirti, Mikita, hi. So we'll just go ahead. So as I said, at the end of the session we'll plan. I'll just give you a table format so that it will be easy for you to summarize and also to recollect simultaneously various casting defects. Hi Ashina. So an unsuccessful casting. So just to briefly summarize the plan. So make sure that you have a hard copy, right, and also a highlighter so that you can underline important points wherever necessary, and also simultaneously you can make a note of important points if possible in a customized notes, right? So we'll have a few important points like what would be the casting pressure, what should be the casting temperature, and what is setback porosity, what should be the angulation of sprue. So all those minute details you can just make a note of them in your notes, right? Yes. Hi Sukanya, good evening. Hi Kalsang, good evening. A very good evening all of you, right? So an unsuccessful casting results in considerable trouble and loss of time. In all instances, defects in castings can be avoided by strict observation of procedures governed by certain fundamental rules and principles. Seldom is a defect in a casting attributable to factors other than the carelessness or ignorance of operator. With present techniques, casting failure should be the exception and not the rule. See, no matter how much you try, there is always some kind of casting error or defect that's evident, right? So we have to make sure that these casting defects or errors are the exception but not the rule, because based on the techniques we have, based on the material properties we're having, these defects or casting defects have to be placed or should be kept at minimum. Nevertheless, there can be always a chance for creeping in of any casting defect, right? So defects in casting are classified broadly into 4 headings, and also in this process we'll discuss few mnemonics in order to remember different types of porosities. I have formulated one mnemonic also, so we'll discuss that in detail in the subsequent process. So the 4 broad types of casting defects include distortion, surface roughness, discoloration, or irregularities. Third, porosity. Fourth, incomplete or missing detail. Right? So first we'll discuss in the sequence, right? Distortion followed by surface roughness or irregularities, porosities, and then incomplete or missing detail. So we'll just directly go ahead to distortion. So if you observe here, so it's all given in a para format, right? So if possible, make sure that you underline in this format the important points. You can highlight, and also you can write down various categories like causes. You can see here I've written here causes, or the solutions, right? You can just categorize them and write down alongside, so that it will be easy for you at a later date for revising, right? So distortion. So what is distortion? Any marked alteration in a particular shape, we consider that as distortion, right? So this distortion in a casting, cast or in a cast metal or in a casting is mainly because of a distortion of wax pattern, and this type of distortion can be minimized or prevented by proper manipulation of wax and handling of the pattern. So the main etiology or the cause for distortion could be distortion of wax pattern. So it can be either direct wax pattern or indirect wax pattern. So whenever you're trying to remove wax pattern, or when the wax pattern margins are very thin, so there can be scope for distortion, either by the clinician or by the errors committed by the lab technician. So either way, there can be the same distortion can be translated to casting as well. Unquestionably, some distortion of wax pattern occurs as the investment hardens around it, because no matter how much precautions you take, as you take a wax pattern and try to invest it, then obviously during the process of setting of investment there can be hygroscopic expansion or setting expansion, and this expansion can lead to expansion of the walls of the mold space or wax, which can further lead to distortion, which is unquestionably unavoidable. You cannot literally minimize or eliminate setting or hygroscopic expansion, right? So this is a common problem, but it is not so severe that it will affect the seating of a casting. See, if there is gross distortion, then obviously the casting will not be fit to place it on a tooth, right? It has to be discarded. But this kind of distortion due to setting or hygroscopic expansion is so minimal that we can neglect it, right? So as I said, the setting and hygroscopic expansions of investments may produce a non-uniform expansion of the walls of pattern. This type of distortion occurs in part from the non-uniform outward movement of proximal walls. The gingival margins are forced apart by the mold expansion, whereas a solid occlusal bar of wax resists expansion during the early stages of setting. The configuration of pattern, the type of wax, and the thickness influence the distortion that occurs, right? So factors pertaining to wax that alter or influence distortion include the type of wax, type 1 or type 2, hard wax or soft wax or medium wax, the thickness of a wax pattern, and also the configuration of wax pattern. So these three factors will influence the distortion that can happen to casting, right? So here there is a relation between, they mentioned the relation between the thickness of pattern, setting expansion, and distortion. So please make a note of it. If the thickness of wax pattern is high, or if a wax pattern is more thick, then distortion would be less, and vice versa. On the other hand, if the setting expansion is high, distortion can be higher, right? So the relation between setting expansion of investment pattern and the distortion which we see in wax pattern, they are directly proportional. Greater the setting expansion, greater the distortion. And the relation between thickness of wax pattern and distortion is inversely proportional, right? So just make a note of these points and just add them up alongside your text, or you can make a note in your customized notes. Generally, this is not considered as a serious problem, right? So not a great deal can be done to control this phenomena, right? So just keep this in mind. Distortion is mainly because of distortion of the wax pattern, and also it can be because of the setting expansion or hygroscopic expansion, which can lead to expansion of the wax pattern walls, gingival walls, proximal walls, and occlusal walls, and this is considered to be non-significant, right? And here we have a relation, that is thickness of pattern is inversely proportional to distortion, whereas setting expansion or hygroscopic expansion is directly proportional to distortion, as understood, or as it is evident clearly, right? So that's pertaining to distortion. So we have completed one aspect of casting defect, that is distortion. And the second aspect is surface roughness, irregularities, and discoloration. So this is given in great detail. We'll just discuss gradually in a phased manner. So surface roughness, irregularities, or discoloration. The surface of a dental casting should be accurate reproduction of surface of wax pattern. That's it, right? Excess roughness or irregularities on the outer surface of casting necessitate additional finishing and polishing, whereas irregularities on cavity surface prevent a proper seating of an otherwise accurate casting. He's just, they're trying to justify saying that if there is any surface roughness or irregularity on the outer surface, then we need to go for additional finishing and polishing procedure. On the other hand, if there is surface roughness or irregularity on the inner aspect of a casting, then there can be problem with seating of casting, right? So the fit on a prepared tooth can be compromised. Surface roughness and surface irregularities are not the same. The difference is surface roughness is defined as relatively finely spaced surface imperfections whose height, width, anti-direction establish the predominant surface pattern, whereas surface irregularities are isolated imperfections such as nodules that are not characteristic of the entire surface. To just simply understand this, surface roughness is something which is seen all over in a particular pattern, whereas surface irregularities are seen in isolated areas only, right? And even under optimal conditions, surface roughness of dental casting is invariably somewhat greater than the wax pattern from which it is made. This roughness can be attributed to the particle size of investment and its ability to reproduce the wax pattern in microscopic detail, right? So the particle size and investment do influence the surface roughness characteristic of a casting, right? And also, with proper manipulation techniques, the normal increased roughness in the casting should not be a major factor in dimensional accuracy. However, improper technique can lead to marked increase in surface roughness as well as formation of surface irregularities. So while manipulation, if there are any air bubbles incorporation, if at all the powder liquid ratio is inadequate, if the mix is more grainy, more viscous, then obviously there can be increased chances of surface irregularities and surface roughness, right? So that's clearly mentioned here. And the main cause of this surface roughness or irregularities is something that is related to the investment material, right? So the particle size of investment material and also its manipulation, the type of manipulation, whether it's a mechanical manipulation, vacuum kind of manipulation, right? So all these factors do play a role. Now, coming to air bubbles. So air bubbles usually they can they appear as in form of nodules on a casting, right? So small nodules on casting are caused by air bubbles that become attached to the pattern during or subsequent to the investment procedure, right? So when you're trying to invest a wax pattern, right? So if you don't apply a wetting agent properly, there can be formation or accumulation of water droplets here and there, which will be seen as small nodules after casting, right? Such nodules can sometimes be removed if they are not in a critical area. However, for nodules on margins or on internal surfaces, removal of these irregularities might alter the fit of casting. As previously noted, the best method to avoid air bubbles is to use vacuum investment technique. So you have this investment technique, or that is vacuum investment technique, which is done in the absence of air. So he's saying image 1223, and as you can see here, so if you look at this projection, this round color structure, this is a nodule, right? So this is a small nodule which is seen attached on the surface because of the same reason, because air bubbles get attached to the pattern during investment. Hence, to overcome this, we go ahead with vacuum mixing, right? If at all a manual method is employed, various precautions can be observed to eliminate air from investment mix before the investing. As previously outlined, the use of a mechanical mixer with vibration but before and after mixing should be practiced. A wetting agent. So a wetting agent may be useful in preventing the collection of air bubbles on the surface of pattern. So this is important. So to prevent accumulation of air bubbles on the surface, we go apply wetting agent uniformly, right? But it is by no means a certain remedy. As previously discussed, it's important that wetting agent, this is again important, right? Wetting agent be applied in a thin layer. It is best to air dry the wetting agent because any excess liquid dilutes the investment, possibly producing surface irregularities on the casting, right? So that's pertaining to air bubbles and how to eliminate them, right? So air bubbles, it's because of attachment of air bubbles on the wax pattern during investment procedure. So water powder liquid ratio should be accurate, and also vacuum mixing should be incorporated, and use of wetting agent in order to overcome these air bubbles, right? So these air bubbles are seen on wax pattern, and they are seen in form of small nodules as we have seen in the image, right? So they appear as small nodules on the surface of casting. Next, coming to water films. So similarly, like air bubbles, we have water films, right? So wax is repellent to water. So that's the basic nature of wax. It is hydrophilic or hydroscopic. It is hydrophobic, right? We call it as hydrophobic. So wax is hydrophobic, repellent to water, and if the investment becomes separated from the wax pattern in some manner, a water film may form irregularly over the surface. Occasionally, this type of surface irregularity appears as minute ridges or veins on surface as shown in the image. If the pattern is slightly moved, jarred, or vibrated after investing, or if the painting procedure doesn't result in intimate contact of investment with the pattern, such a condition may result. A wetting agent is of aid in prevention of such irregularities. Too high liquid powder ratio may also produce these surface irregularities, right? So he's saying 1223b. So in the same image which I have shown you previously, so you can see here a linear structure. So this is a representation of a water film, right? So it is seen in form of a ridge or linear elevation, or in form of a vein, right? So this appears as a minute ridges or veins on the surface, and the reason for formation of these water films is because if any case the wax pattern is separated from the surrounding investment, either because of moving of investment after an investment procedure, or because of jarred movements, or because of any disturbances in position of wax pattern with respect to the investment material, there can be formation of or accumulation of water film, right, on the surface of the wax rather than getting absorbed by the wax, since wax is hydrophobic. So to overcome that, we have to, or we can go for application of a wetting agent as discussed previously, right? So it prevents what air bubbles, right, nodule formation. It also prevents these veins or ridges formation. So that's pertaining to water films. So see, it can be either a nodule or a fin or a ridge. All this contribute to increase in surface roughness as well as increase in surface irregularities, which can again alter the casting, which can alter the positioning of the casting over a particular prepared tooth. So that's very important. And then coming to rapid heating rates. So this factor, which has been discussed, may result in fins or spines on casting, which are shown in the figure 1217. I'll just show you the image. So just now we have seen ridges, right? Ridges or veins. Now I'll show you spines or fins. So you can see here clearly this image shows fins or spines on casting which are formed as a result of rapid heating rates, right? So all these images are from Phillips only. So rapid heating rates can lead to formation of fins or spines. Also, a characteristic surface roughness may be evident because of flaking of investment when the water or steam pours into the mold. right? So furthermore, such a surge of steam or water may carry some of the salts used as modifiers into the mold, and these salts are left as deposits on walls after water evaporates. So just remember, if there is a rapid heating, then there can be increased in tendency to form these fins or spines, which can lead to surface irregularity and roughness. Just make a note of this point. The mold is nothing but once you place wax inside an investment, once you subject that investment to burnout, all the wax will be eliminated, leaving a space, right? That we call it as a mold space, right? So here you go. The mold should be heated gradually, so there should not be rapid heating. The mold should be heated gradually. At least 60 minutes should elapse during the heating of the investment filled ring from the room temperature to 700 degrees centigrade. So there has to be gradual heating from room temperature to 700 degrees centigrade, and the duration should be approximately 60 minutes, so minimum of 60 minutes. The greater the bulk of investment, the more slowly it should be heated, right? Only then you can eliminate these kind of surface irregularities or roughness, right? So as we have seen, formation of fins or spines can be eliminated by cooling the investment or casting in a gradual manner, right? So it should not be less than 60 minutes, a minimum of 60 minutes from the room temperature to 700 degrees, right? So this gradual heating will avoid formation of these fins or spines. And then coming to underheating. So since we have seen rapid overheating or rapid heating, right? Underheating is incomplete elimination of wax residues may occur. So once you underheat, there can be incomplete elimination of wax residues if the heating time is too short or if insufficient air is available in furnace. These factors are particularly important with the low temperature investment techniques. So voids or porosities may occur in the casting from the gases formed. So because of underheating, there will be a residue of wax left. There can be formation of voids because of either back pressure porosity. We'll discuss all that separately, right? And there can be voids or porosity, right, because of presence of these gases, right? And occasionally the casting may be covered with a tenacious carbon coating that is virtually impossible to remove by pickling. So because of this underheating, the wax residues remain inside, the gases will not be vented out or will not have a chance to escape outside properly, and also most importantly, there can be formation of a residue, carbon residue on the surface of a molten alloy after it solidifies, right? So this carbon residue will be extremely difficult to eliminate even after pickling procedure. So pickling, just make a note of it, it's nothing but metal surface treatment which is used for removing impurities. So it's a surface treatment given to a metal to remove impurities, and the agents used are hydrochloric acid and sulfuric acid, right? So these are the agents that are used for pickling. Just make a note of it. So underheating has the following drawbacks, right? Hope it's clear. Now coming to liquid powder ratio. The amount of water and investment should be measured accurately. The higher the liquid powder ratio, the rougher the casting. However, if too little water is used, the investment may be unimaginably thick and cannot be properly applied to the pattern. In vacuum investing, the air may not be sufficiently removed. In either instance, a rough surface on the casting may result. So, too high liquid powder ratio or too low liquid powder ratio can lead to surface roughness or irregularities. Just make a note of that important point pertaining to this paragraph. And then coming to prolonged heating. So when high heating casting technique is used, prolonged heating of mold at casting temperature is likely to cause disintegration of gypsum based investment materials, and the walls of mold are roughened as a result. Furthermore, the products of decomposition are sulfur compounds that may contaminate the alloy to the extent that the surface texture is affected. Such contamination may be a reason that the surface of casting sometimes doesn't respond to pickling, right? And when the thermal expansion technique is employed, the mold should be heated to the casting temperature never high, and the casting should be made immediately, right? So just remember, prolonged heating can lead to disintegration of the investment material, cracks in mold space, which is translated in the form of surface irregularities and surface roughness, and in the process there can be release of sulfur from the investment material, which can contaminate the surface of an alloy, and this again doesn't respond to pickling, and sulfur contamination can lead to greenish discoloration of the surface of the alloy also, right? And next, coming to temperature of alloy. If alloy is heated too high a temperature before casting, the surface of investment is likely to be attacked, and surface roughness of type described in the previous section can result. In all probability, the alloy will not be overheated with a gas air torch when used with gas supplied in most localities. If other fuel is used, special care should be observed that the color emitted by molten gold, for example, is no lighter than light orange. So temperature of alloy should not exceed. I mean, if it is higher, again it will start attacking the mold surface, the investment part of mold surface, and there can be again surface roughness or irregularity, right? So if you're trying to heat a metal alloy, for example, he says, molten gold alloy, the color should not be lighter than light orange, right? So it should be a light orange, then it is considered to be accurate enough in order to proceed with casting, right? And we have few other factors like casting pressure. We'll just continue this. Before, I'll just look at the comments, right? Hi, Sukanya, Swapnil, Sairaj, Jagdish, Nikhil, Vishal, a very good evening. Vishal, I will come back to that question at the end of the session, right? So that's a more general question. We'll discuss that soon, right? So let's just complete this and we'll proceed with the Q&A session also, right? So temperature of alloy should not be too high, right? So depends upon the type of alloy, we proceed with the particular temperature given, right? So casting pressure, too high a pressure during a casting can produce a rough surface on casting. A gauge pressure of 0.1 to 0.14 MPa in air pressure casting machine, or 3 to 4 turns of spring in an average type of centrifugal casting machine is sufficient for small casting. So a pressure range he mentioned is 0.1 to 0.14 MPa in an air pressure casting machine. So we have different casting machines, air pressure casting machine, or we have the centrifugal casting machines, right? If it is an air pressure casting machine, the casting pressure has to be 0.1 to 0.14. If it is centrifugal casting machine, the pressure has to be 3 to 4 turns of the spring, right? If casting pressure is too low, then there will be again insufficient venting of gases, which can again lead to back pressure porosity, right? So we'll discuss porosities in detail in the next subsequent section. Coming to composition of investment, the ratio of binder to the quartz influences the surface texture. In addition, coarse silica causes surface roughness, right? So in the investment, presence of binder, the ratio of binder to quartz, presence of coarse silica, all these can influence the surface roughness. And most important, we have a very important point here. According to ADS specification number 2, if a material meets the specifications as given by ADS specification 2, right? That's for investment materials, right? Gypsum bonded investment. Then the composition is probably not a factor in surface roughness. We can go happily use that material, right? It cannot cause any surface roughness. Okay, so casting, I'm really sorry. Casting is nothing but, for example, you have wax. Just imagine there is a tooth. You reduce the tooth all over. You take an impression, right? You take an impression. You make a cast. On the cast, now you have a prepared tooth. For example, 1-1. So on 1-1, you will place some wax, right? You will fill up the prepared tooth with a wax, right? In order to get the desired shape. So that wax is converted into alloy, into a metal. The wax is converted into metal through a process called as casting, right? So this casting is done using this investment material casting machine. So we have many techniques there, right? So what we do is we take a cast, we place a wax pattern. We apply wax over there. We take that wax pattern, invest it or place it in a crucible which contains a space for placing this wax pattern, and that is filled by investment material. And this is then transferred to casting machine and heated to up to 700, for example, in case of gypsum bonded, so that all the wax is eliminated. And in the place of wax, we will send molten metal, right? So this I'm telling you just in brief, in layman terms, and this is called as casting, right? Yeah, casting, it can include full crowns, onlays, inlays, veneers, whatnot. So all indirect restorations are produced by casting, right? Even you have, I mean, in wax patterns, again, all indirect, as I said, are produced by casting. And the wax patterns, as I mentioned here, you can have two types of wax pattern techniques: direct wax pattern and indirect wax pattern, right? So no matter what the technique is, ultimately it has to be it has to undergo casting, right? So the wax has to be converted into a metal, isn't it? I hope it's clear, right? We use the same wax, same inlay wax. Curella, we use the same inlay wax. And again, the type of wax depends whether it's a direct pattern or indirect pattern. We have type 1 and type 2 inlay wax, right? So yeah. Now looking into foreign bodies, right? So foreign bodies can be incorporated in the casting, in the wax pattern, which can lead to surface roughness again, right? And also there can be, as I said, sulfur contamination, which can lead to discoloration, right? And investment breakdown. And so all this we have already discussed extensively. And coming to impact of molten alloy, so as we discussed previously, and we are going to discuss that again in detail. So if the molten alloy, if it is at too high temperature of, or if the, for example, you have a wax pattern like this, you have a sprue, we have something called a sprue, which is a channel through which the molten alloy enters, right? So if the sprue is at 90 degrees, then what happens is the molten alloy enters inside the mold space and then attacks the mold space. So there can be again suckback porosity. We'll discuss that later. So to overcome that, we have to attach sprue in a glancing manner at around 45 degrees on the thickest portion of the wax pattern, right? So only when you attach it in this fashion, then will not find or will not have any influence or impact of molten alloy on the mold space, right? We'll discuss that in the next subsequent section. Pattern position. Again, we have an important value here. If several patterns are invested in the same ring, they should not be placed too close together, right? So what should be the distance between the patterns, between two patterns? So it is 3 mm. Just make a note of it, right? Positioning too many patterns in the same plane in the mold should be avoided. The expansion of wax is much greater. The reason why we should have Vishal, we'll have a general Q&A session this Saturday, right? Okay, fine. So we'll post all the updates in our Facebook and WhatsApp group also. You can just follow them. So the reason why we should have a minimum distance of 3 mm between the wax patterns or between the sprues or whatever it is because since wax expands, there can be thinning of the investment material, which can lead to fracture, right? Just make a note of it. The expansion of wax is much greater than that of investment, causing breakdown or cracking of investment if the spacing between the patterns is less than 3 mm. So the distance between two patterns, right? So if, for example, you're doing two crowns, right? So one crown and the other crown, we placed two wax patterns inside a casting ring. Then the distance between these two patterns has to be minimum of 3 mm, right? The reason as given here clearly, right? I know it's quite difficult to understand the terms casting, pattern, investment, casting machine and all, but once you observe it, or once you do it, in post-graduation we'll have the benefit of doing this personally, right, along with the technician. So it will be easy for you to grasp, or at least if you have the, at least you have the opportunity to go into your department's lab and just observe like what really the lab technician is doing, then it will be very, very easy for you to clearly understand the concepts which we are going to discuss today, or else it will be like comparatively tough to absorb all this information, right? And then carbon inclusion. So as discussed previously, there can be carbon containing investment or from an improperly adjusted torch that can be absorbed by the alloy, leading to formation of carbides or visible carbide inclusions or residues, which can make the casting difficult to pickling, right? And other causes of discoloration, we have a few other causes mentioned here. It can be because of improper selection of alloys and a mixture of different casting alloys, etc., right? And most importantly, There can be discoloration, especially when you place an amalgam restoration alongside a gold restoration, right? So a surface of discoloration, a source of discoloration often overlooked in the surface contamination of gold alloy restoration by mercury is by mercury. Mercury penetrates rapidly into the alloy and causes a marked loss of ductility and greater susceptibility to corrosion. Thus, it is not a good practice to place a new amalgam restoration adjacent to a high noble alloy restoration. In addition to this problem of increased susceptibility to corrosion and marked loss of ductility of the casting of the alloy material, there can be galvanic kind of corrosion, right? So the saliva forms an electrolyte, though amalgam acts as anode, whereas gold alloy acts as a cathode, right? So you have this in electromotive series, right? So they'll have different potential. This leads to transfer of charges, and there can be sharp pain, and also most importantly amalgam restoration gets degraded, the anode gets degraded and relative to the cathode, right? So we have two issues here. Once you place an amalgam restoration opposite or alongside a gold alloy, there can be galvanic kind of corrosion and severe pain clinically, right, on contact of these restorations during occlusion. And also most importantly, the mercury which is released as a process, can go attack and penetrate the noble alloys and can decrease their corrosion resistance, right? They can decrease their corrosion resistance and they can lead to marked decrease in ductility. The greatest advantage of property, the best property a gold alloy has or gold restoration has is ductility, marked ductility, right? So that will be decreased in the process. So that finishes surface irregularities and roughness, right? So first we have discussed about distortion. So distortion, the causes, and then we briefly discussed about surface roughness, irregularities and discoloration, where we tried to find out the different causes for these surface roughness, irregularities, discolorations, and also differences between roughness and irregularity, right? And next we will look into porosities, various types of porosities, and then finally we have incomplete casting, right? So that will complete our casting defects, right? So we'll just have a 2-minute break and then we'll continue with the session, right? So if in case you have any queries now, I'll be happy to clear them. Vishal, we'll see you this Saturday, right? Saturday we'll have a general Q&A session, or you can mail us at proudtobedentist@gmail.com. I will guide you accordingly. Yeah, it's proudtobedentist@gmail.com. Degassing or desorption is elimination of gases, adsorbed gases. So that is degassing. And Scurella asks, is suckback porosity and shrinkage porosity same or different? See, suckback porosity, back pressure porosity, or you have another kind, what is it? Localized shrinkage porosity. All these porosities are mainly because of shrinkage only. But localized shrinkage porosity and suckback are different. I mean, to be more specific to your question, localized shrinkage porosity is different, suckback porosity is different. Yeah, both are different. In suckback we see hot spots. Because of hot spot you will have this suckback porosity. Localized shrinkage porosity is something which is seen mainly because of narrow sprue diameter, narrow sprue, which can lead to premature solidification of metal alloy in the sprue. That can lead to shrinkage porosity. So, did I miss any other questions? Vishal asks, can't we just study MCQ like and from dental worlds and dentist in clear neat? Okay, are we supposed to read entire textbook? See, the purpose of this textbook discussion or live session containing textbook discussion is to get used to studying or reading textbooks and trying to get concepts directly from the textbook, so that you will not have any doubt or ambiguity in a particular topic, right? So this textbook discussion will help you enormously in gaining confidence, and it gives you accurate information, right? So that's the reason why we're doing this. And most importantly, one should always start with textbook. I'm not talking about those aspirants who are appearing for exam this year in 4 months time, but in general the concept is you have to start with textbook. Or if you're planning for preparing for NEET, at least if you have 1 year, it's better you refer textbook also, but not starting with studying entire textbook. But when you are at the basic level, you get lot much information from your textbook only, right? So you'll just read MCQs from Pulse or some dentist, or you say something, yes, you will get some information, but you want to be sure of answering all questions, you want to be gaining more confidence, then you should refer your standard textbooks also. If time is less, if you have adequate time, then textbook reading is suggestible, right? Hi Ajaj. Nikhil, MCQs of casting defect. In the process of this discussion, you'll have lot many multiple choice questions. Okay, since you're asking Nikhil, at the end of session, I'll just give you different kinds of MCQs, the probable type of multiple choice questions which you can get from this topic, right? Hi Ashi, good evening. So this is very important, just keep this in mind when you're planning for PG, right? So when you're planning for PG, it all appears good. So when you are in undergraduate level or when you're in internship, the PG and all, it all appears very good, shiny, it's like life would be so good, etc., right? So from the external surface, it looks good, but once you enter into the post graduation 3 years of life, you're going to get lot many bombardments that you'll become slim ultimately. You remember this? I mean, you get what I'm trying to say. So PG appears to be fine, right, from the external side, but inside there can be lot many issues. Once you enter, I mean, with the effect of PG, you'll become much more slimmer, right? So this is the mnemonic in order to remember porosities. Just remember this phrase. It's obviously easy to remember, right? So it will be easy for you to remember the porosities and their classification. The reason why I quoted this mnemonic is porosities you can have lot many, like porosities because of solidification defects, porosities because of trapped gases, and porosities because of residual air. And in solidification defects, again, you have localized shrinkage porosities and microporosities. And in trapped gases, again, you have pinhole porosity, gas inclusion porosity, and subsurface porosities, right? So you have lot many subcategories. So how do you remember all this, right? So I framed this mnemonic: slim, PG, subsurface. So just remember these words, it will be easy for you, like how it is in the sense. First category is slim, SLIM. As I said, once you enter PG, because of the effects, you will become slim, right? SLIM, slim. So S stands for solidification defects, right? L stands for localized shrinkage porosity. M stands for microporosity. Leave about I, because even without I, you can pronounce it as slim, SLM, right? So S stands for solidification defect, L for localized shrinkage porosity, M for microporosity. And then the second subcategory is, as I said, PG subsurface, right? So trapped gases. So once you enter PG, it's like you're trapped for 3 years, right? So in trapped gases, you have PG subsurface, P for pinhole porosity, G for gas inclusions, S for subsurface porosity, right? And then third category, so after PG, only residue remains, right, in your life. So residual air. So these are the 3 subcategories which you can have, and you can remember this by this format: PG subsurface trap. So PG appears to be fine, but subsurface it is a lot of hardship and all. And once you enter PG, you're trapped inside, right? And at the end of completion of PG, you'll become slim with only residual air or residue remaining within you, right? So I'll not repeat this again, I'll not bore you. So this is the mnemonic which I framed, and you can easily remember various solidification defects, which includes localized shrinkage porosity and microporosity. And then trapped gases, you have PG subsurface, pinhole porosity, gas inclusion porosity, and subsurface porosity. And third category, residual air, right? Hi Lakshmi. Hi Sairaj. That's cool for you, Lakshmi. Okay, once you understand, once you enter into PG, then you will know the opposite of coolness, right? Okay, just kidding, right? So this is just for sake of mnemonic. In fact, PG is very good. You will have much opportunity to learn, and the rest of the life you can use this as a starting point to gain as much knowledge as possible, both theoretically as well as clinically. Okay, Lakshmi, Shruti. Okay, Lakshmi, Shruti. Fine. So now, since we have seen the classification of porosities, we will go ahead with different kinds of porosities, right? So localized shrinkage porosity, will start with the first one. So as the name itself indicates, there is porosity in the localized area. So where do you find this localized shrinkage porosity? At the junction of sprue and the wax pattern. You have this wax pattern, we attach a sprue here, something like this, and we'll have a reservoir here. So this sprue, the function of this sprue is to form a channel so that the molten alloy enters into the mold space, which is created by the burnout of wax pattern, right? I think I'm not talking Greek and Latin, right? So this is all given in text, right? So that's the reason why I said once you go into the lab technician's room and observe all this, it will be easy for you comparatively, right? Okay. So localized shrinkage is generally caused by premature termination of the flow of molten metal during solidification, right? So I'll just explain you in brief, and I'll just go through the important points here. So in localized shrinkage, what's actually happening is you have a wax pattern, you have a sprue attached here, right? So let me just take a pen. So you have a sprue attached here like this, right? At 45 degrees, but not at 90 degrees, right? Again, at 90 degrees, you can have hot spot or suck back porosity. So sprue is attached at 45 degrees. So this is all made of wax initially. So you invest that in an investment material in a casting ring, and then this entire wax pattern along with sprue is gone. I mean, it'll just burn out, right? Since it's made of wax once you increase the temperature. So once you pass a molten alloy, the molten alloy flows into this, right? Always remember, when a molten alloy converts from molten state into a solid state, there is contraction, linear contraction of 1.25%. Make a note of it, right? So when molten alloy is solidified, there is a contraction of approximately 1.25%, right? So as a result, what happens is, as the molten alloy enters here and fills the entire mold space, so this is the part which solidifies first, and again there will be shrinkage here, right? So this shrinkage is compensated by flow of molten alloy which is present on top, and the cycle continues, right? And finally, the entire casting or entire alloy which is present here solidifies, and there will be shrinkage in this area at the junction, right? So this shrinkage is compensated by flow of molten alloy which is present in the sprue channel, right? So that's how we don't find localized shrinkage porosity in a normal case scenario. If in case there is solidification of the molten alloy within this sprue, if the alloy is solidified here itself, then what happens, whatever molten alloy which has entered here will solidify, and there will be shrinkage, and there can be a porosity here. Usually we find porosity, localized shrinkage porosity, at the junction of attachment of sprue to the wax pattern. So this is the common site for location of this localized shrinkage porosity, right? Hope it's clear. Okay, we'll just read the theory now, and we'll try to understand it further. Localized shrinkage is generally caused by premature termination of flow of molten metal during solidification. The linear contraction of noble metal alloys is changing. The linear contraction of noble metal alloys in changing from a liquid to a solid state is at least 1.25%. You can make a note of it, right? Therefore, continual feeding of molten metal through the sprue must occur to make up for the shrinkage of the metal volume during solidification. If a sprue freezes in the cross section before this feeding is completed to the casting proper, a localized shrinkage void will occur in the last portion of the casting that solidifies. The last portion of the casting that solidifies is this junction, right? So that's pertaining to localized shrinkage porosity, and I hope it's clear. And let me show you the image here, right? So we have an image for localized shrinkage porosity. If you observe this image here, right, just observe the image here, you can see in the pontic area at the junction, I mean here usually we apply or we attach sprue along the marginal ridges, right? So here you have a shrinkage. So this is localized shrinkage porosity, this area, right? So in the image, if you see, it's a FPD, right? So the porosity in the pontic area is caused by the ability of the pontic to retain heat because of its bulk and because it was located in the center of the ring. This problem can be solved by simply attaching one or more small gauze sprues, 18 gauze at the surface most distant from the main sprue attachment, right? So to overcome that, what we do is we attach multiple sprues. So we attach multiple sprues wherever necessary, and the sprue diameter, it has to be 18 gauze sprue, and this is called as chill set sprues. When you attach multiple sprues for a long span wax pattern, if for a single unit you can place just one sprue, right? For a multiple units you have to go for placement of multiple sprues, and this is called as chill set sprue. It's given here in brackets, right? I mean not in brackets, normally chill set sprues, CHILL. So these are called as chill set sprues because they ensure that solidification begins within the sprues, and most importantly they act as cooling pins to carry heat away from the pontic, right? So you can have a question on chill set sprues and the diameter or the gauze of the sprue, that is 18 gauze, right? I mean we call it as gauge, 18 gauge. Yeah, so just make a note of it also. So localized shrinkage porosity generally occurs near the sprue casting junction, but it may occur anywhere, right? So just make a note of it. Localized shrinkage porosity, the location is near the sprue casting junction. You can have a multiple choice question from this also, right? And remember now, the type of void may also occur externally, usually in interior, if a hot spot has been created by the hot metal impinging from the sprue channel on a point of mold wall. This hot spot causes local region to freeze last and results in what is called as suckback porosity, as shown in the figure 1226C. So again, this is quite interesting. See, as I said, once you attach of a sprue to the wax pattern, right? So if you attach it at 90 degrees, what happens is, just imagine this is the mold surface, right? So remove the sprue. So since it is attached at 90 degrees, the molten alloy comes and impinges on this surface, right? As a result, this particular spot is called as hot spot because it retains more heat compared to the rest of the area. So because of this hot spot creation, the molten alloy in this area solidifies last. As a result of solidification, there will be, as I mentioned previously, 1.25% approximate linear contraction, which leads to suckback porosity in this region. And this suckback porosity or hotspot porosity is mainly seen along the occlusoaxial or incisoaxial line angle. So the location for solidification, localized shrinkage porosity is the location is at the sprue casting junction, whereas the location for this suckback porosity is along the line angles of occlusoaxial or incisoaxial line angles, as you can see clearly in this image, right? So you can see here the difference, right? So almost at the incisoaxial line angle, at this point you have a suckback porosity. This is created because of the sprue attachment. Because of improper sprue attachment, there is impingement of molten alloy at this particular spot in a mold space, leading to creation of a hot spot, right? So that's the reason why that part has solidified last. Since it has solidified last, there will be obviously shrinkage in the last part which is getting solidified, right? So that leads to this suck back porosity, and this is usually seen at occluso-axial line angle or inciso-axial line angle, right? Hope it's clear. So that's the difference between localized shrinkage porosity and suck back porosity, as one of the aspirants asked previously. So that's the main difference, right? And suck back porosity can be eliminated by flaring the point of screw attachment, by placing a reservoir, and also by reducing the mold melt temperature, that is lowering the casting temperature by about 30 degrees centigrade, and the angulation of screw has to be like 45 degrees. It should not be at 90 degrees, right? Glancing, we call that as glancing. It's mentioned it as glancing, right? The screw should be like glancing, something like this, not 90. And coming to microporosity, microporosities also occur from solidification shrinkage, SLM, right? Solidification shrinkage includes localized shrinkage and microporosities, but is generally present in fine grain alloy castings when solidification is too rapid for the microvoids to segregate to the liquid pool, right? So this microporosity is mainly seen because it is generally present in fine grain alloy castings when the solidification is too rapid for the microvoids to segregate to liquid pool. This premature solidification causes porosity shown in the images 1224C. So 1224C, right? So I've shown you the picture previously also. Small irregular voids. 1226. Yeah, I mean the same image is saying like you can have small irregular voids, microporosities, right? You can see here another one, right? So this is because of premature solidification causing the porosities, and it is generally present in fine grain alloy castings when solidification is too rapid for the microvoids to segregate to the liquid pool. Usually during solidification, according to him, the microvoids are segregated, but because of too rapid solidification, these microvoids remain there itself, leading to formation of microporosities. And then you have pinhole and gas inclusion porosities, which are related to entrapment of gas during solidification. As I mentioned previously, if there is insufficient casting pressure, if there is insufficient casting temperature, the wax residues remain, the gases are entrapped within the mold space, and there is no proper venting or escape of gases from the investment, leading to entrapment of gases, further leading to back pressure porosity, pinhole porosity, and gas inclusion porosities, right? The main difference between pinhole porosity and gas inclusion porosity is this: pinhole is smaller, whereas gas inclusion is comparatively larger, and both have spherical contours, right? The contour is spherical as shown in the images, right? The reason why we find these pinhole and gas inclusion porosities is mainly because the molten alloy absorbs or dissolves certain gases. For example, copper and silver dissolve oxygen in large amounts in liquid state. Platinum and palladium, molten platinum and palladium have a strong affinity for hydrogen in liquid state or in molten state. When they are solidified, the gases are released, thereby leading to pinhole or gas inclusion porosities, right? So we have a table here. Just observe this table. I'll just read out for you. This table is very, very important, and I've seen one or two multiple choice questions from this table itself, right? So it's very easy to understand also. So localized shrinkage porosity, you can just make a note of it, right? Localized shrinkage porosity is reduced with increase in sprue thickness. So when you increase the sprue thickness, obviously localized shrinkage porosity can be eliminated, because if a sprue is narrow, then there can be premature solidification. To prevent that, we should have increase in thickness of sprue. So increase in sprue thickness reduces localized shrinkage porosity. Increase in sprue length can increase localized shrinkage porosity. When the sprue is longer, there can be premature solidification anywhere in the sprue. There can be greater chance of premature solidification, right? So increase in thickness reduces localized shrinkage porosity, whereas increase in length increases the chance for localized shrinkage porosity. And increase in melt temperature and increase in mold temperature would reduce localized shrinkage porosity, right? So there won't be, these localized shrinkage porosities are because of premature solidification. When you have adequate melt temperature and adequate mold temperature, then there won't be this localized shrinkage, right? So increase in melt temperature and mold temperature reduces localized shrinkage porosity. And then coming to subsurface porosity, increase in sprue thickness increases subsurface porosity, whereas increase in sprue length reduces subsurface porosity. And increase in melt temperature and mold temperature increases subsurface porosity. And coming to microporosity has nothing to do with sprue thickness or length, because microporosities are something to do with the fine grain alloys and the solidification process, right? However, increase in melt temperature and mold temperature reduces microporosities, right? So that's obvious. So when the temperature rises, obviously they'll have a chance to segregate and separate to a liquid pool, right? So the table is very important. Just observe the table and try to analyze the reasons why we have increase or decrease in the various porosities depending upon the length and diameter of sprue, and also depending upon the melt temperature and the mold temperature. By the way, melt temperature is the temperature where the alloy is melted, right? That is melt temperature. Mold temperature is the temperature of the wax burnout and all, right? So that's the difference. And then you have other types of porosities called as subsurface porosity. If you observe page 346, microporosity, Bernice, it's not given very clearly here. All that's mentioned here is, I'll just read out the line. Microporosity occurs, or it is present generally in fine grain alloy castings. Fine grain alloy castings when the solidification is too rapid for the microvoids to segregate to the liquid pool. So what he's trying to say is, usually the microvoid formation in fine grain alloys is common. When the temperature is adequate, then these will shift towards the liquid pool, or these will get dissipated to the surface, right? So that's how they're eliminated normally. But microporosities are mainly seen especially when there is too rapid solidification. When there is no scope for the microvoids to escape, when there is too rapid solidification, then there can be entrapment of these voids within, and these microporosities cannot be seen visibly. We need to section them, and inside in the cross section we can visualize these microporosities, right? So these are not of much significance, right? So all that's given, the reason all that's given here is premature solidification of fine grain alloy castings, which prevents the microvoids to get segregated in the liquid pool, right? And then you have subsurface porosity. The reason for such voids have not been completely established. So subsurface porosity also, they are not clearly mentioning the reason, but what they're saying is it's because of the cause could be because of simultaneous nucleation of solid grains and gas bubbles at the first moment that the alloy freezes at the mold walls. So you have this molten alloy flowing and touching the surface of a mold. So at the time of the interaction, there can be interaction, simultaneous nucleation of solid grains and gas bubbles, nucleation or formation leading to subsurface porosities, right? So that's the probable mechanism mentioned for subsurface porosity. This type of subsurface porosities can be diminished by controlling the rate at which molten metal enters the mold. And in the previous table, they have mentioned subsurface porosity and also the relation between the sprue length and thickness, and also the mold and melt temperature, right? So this subsurface porosity is mainly because of simultaneous nucleation of solid grains and gas bubbles. Solid grains in the sense grains pertaining to the alloy, whereas gas bubbles are something which are pertaining to the mold space and carbon residues or wax pattern. So because of their simultaneous nucleation or interaction, when the alloy freezes at the mold walls, so that's where we see subsurface porosity. As the name itself indicates, these porosities are found below the surface, right? Yeah, images you can share in group, sure. See, the mechanism of microporosity and subsurface porosity are not very clear, and if you want to probe in detail, we need to have some basic understanding of metallurgy also, which would be beyond the scope of discussion, right? So that's the reason why I haven't really probed into them, right? So all that's given there, we're just choosing those sentences and we're just sticking to that, right? because once you start digging, it becomes so extensive that I will have to go out of the bounds, right? So I didn't want to do that, so that's the reason why I'm restricting here itself. And then you can have entrapped air porosity. So as I mentioned previously, just one second, please don't mind. So as I mentioned previously, so in insufficient casting pressure, insufficient casting temperature can lead to insufficient venting or escape of gases from the mold space, which can lead to gas accumulation, which prevents the molten alloy from entering inside, right? So that is called as back pressure porosity. So entrapped air porosity or back pressure porosity on the inner surface of casting, sometimes referred to as back pressure porosity, can produce large concave depressions such as those shown in images 12.29. You can just have a look here. So you have these depressions, large concave depressions. It's because of the back pressure created by the entrapped gases, right? Yeah. So entrapment of gases, right? So this is caused by inability of air in the mold to escape through the pores in investment or by the pressure gradient. It's because of the pores investment. If it is too thick, water powder ratio altered, then obviously investment is too thick, then these gases cannot escape, right? And also the entrapment is just one second. So this is caused by inability of air in the mold to escape through the pores in investment or by the pressure gradient that displaces the air pocket towards the end of investment via the molten sprue and button. Entrapment is frequently found at the cavity surface of crown or meso-occluso-distal casting as shown in the image. That's fine. And occasionally it is found even on the outside surface, right? So the reasons for this entrapped air porosity is occasionally it is found even on outside surface casting. Okay, all this we can skip. This is important. The incidence of entrapped air can be increased by use of dense modern investments, right? So as I said, if the investment is very much dense, then the venting of air is very much minimal, right? And also there can be clogging of the pores. See, investment, it's not always uniform. You can have microscopic pores, right? If these pores are clogged by the carbon residues, again there can be insufficient venting of air, right? So that can lead to back pressure porosity. So proper burnout, adequate mold and casting temperature, and sufficiently high casting pressure, proper liquid powder ratio will help eliminate entrapped air porosity. So we have 4 factors here. Proper burnout, so we have to completely eliminate the wax residues, right? Proper burnout, adequate temperature of mold and casting. If there is inadequate temperature, again the gases will not be escaping outside, and a sufficiently high casting pressure to allow venting of gases, and a proper liquid powder ratio. If the liquid powder ratio is low, then the mass is more viscous, preventing escape of these gases, right? So this is important, make a note of it. It's good practice to make sure that the thickness of investment between the tip of the pattern and the end of the ring. For example, if this is the investment, this is a wax pattern and you have an investment all over, right, in the form of a cylinder. The minimum distance from the ring or from the tip of the ring of the investment liner to the wax pattern has to be a minimum 6 mm, right? Thickness of investment between the tip of pattern and the end of the ring of casting machine or the casting ring should not be greater than 6 mm, right? It should be 6 mm or less than 6 mm. Just imagine if the distance between the outer surface and the wax pattern is more, then the probability of gases escaping outside is very much minimal, right? So that's the reason why there has to be 6 mm or less than 6 mm, the distance from the outer ring towards the tip of the wax pattern. And this completes porosities, right? So we have slim, trapped PG, subsurface and residual. So that's the mnemonic we frame. And coming to final aspect, that is incomplete casting. So incomplete casting, there are 2 main factors for incomplete casting. That is insufficient venting of mold as discussed now, and high viscosity of fused metal. So these can lead to incomplete casting. In incomplete casting, as we can see here, so the margins appear to be rounded. Margins appear to be rounded and also shiny, right? We'll discuss these same images now in subsequent section. I mean, we'll be completing in another 5 to 10 minutes, right? So incomplete casting is mainly because of two factors: insufficient venting of mold and also because of high viscous molten alloy. So insufficient venting were discussed now, right? The casting pressure has to be applied, right? See, previously as we discussed, there has to be sufficient casting pressure, right? So the magnitude of casting pressure has to be sufficient enough. We have discussed the value also previously, 0.1 to 0.14 MPa in a pressure casting machine. Pressure, it's not only the magnitude of pressure but also the duration of pressure that's important, right? So the pressure should be applied for at least 4 seconds. Make a note of it. We have a multiple choice question here also, right? So the pressure should be applied for a minimum of 4 seconds. Because the reason is the mold is filled and the alloy is solidified in 1 second or less, yet it is quite soft during the early stages, right? Therefore the pressure should be maintained for a few seconds beyond this point, right? So just make a note of it. Pressure should be applied for at least 4 seconds. The mold is filled and the alloy is solidified in 1 second or less. However, so even though the mold takes less than 1 second to solidify, it still remains softer. That's the reason why we have to allow sufficient casting pressure for sufficient duration of at least 4 seconds, right? And we have incomplete casting because of incomplete elimination of wax residues. We discussed that extensively. Liquid powder ratio, all this, okay, that's fine, right? So this incomplete elimination of wax residues is because of blockage of pores of investment material, because of carbon residues, or because of less liquid powder ratio of investment. And different alloy compositions probably exhibit different viscosities. And also, as I mentioned, two factors which are responsible for incomplete casting. The first one is insufficient venting of mold, and second one is high viscosity. And this viscosity can vary depending upon different alloys, right? Depending upon the composition, we will have different varying viscosities which are in molten state. Just remember, this is the final one. Both the surface tension and the viscosity of molten alloy are decreased with increase in temperature, right? So an incomplete casting resulting from too great viscosity can be attributed to insufficient heating. The temperature of alloy should be raised higher than its liquidus temperature so that its viscosity and surface tension are lower, and so that it doesn't solidify prematurely as it enters the mold. So is talking about the melt temperature of an alloy. It should be sufficiently high in order to permit the entry of the alloy in a molten state in a less viscous manner. If it is more viscous, again there can be incomplete casting, because more viscous, if it is more thick, compare water and honey, water will have a better ability to penetrate compared to honey, right? So similarly, you should have a molten alloy which is less viscous. For that to be less viscous, increase the melt temperature beyond the liquidus temperature or melting range. So this is regarding casting defects, right? So we discussed extensively about distortion, the causes of distortion, how to overcome them, surface roughness, discoloration, irregularities, the causes and the means to overcome them, and porosities. So porosities, the causes of porosities, different classification of porosities, and finally incomplete or missing casting or missing detail, right? So just make sure that you read a standard textbook when you're trying to get a concept right. So if you are unable to understand few points, dental materials in particular is quite challenging, because there are instances where you need to dig deep into metallurgical aspects, especially when I was referring direct filling gold. So direct filling gold, they'll mention regarding cold welding, right? So cold welding is something which is done at room temperature. So once I tried to probe in a deep inside, so what I realized is they have mentioned clearly in Phillips itself that it would be beyond the scope of this textbook to explain you in detail the mechanism of cold welding, and this line is given as such in Phillips, right? So Some things it's better not to probe inside. I mean, if you're really interested, that's good. You can probe, you can understand, and you can just enjoy the subject, right? But as far as today's discussion is concerned, we're trying to give as much information as possible, as many important points as possible, pertaining and related and relevant to the topic concerned, right? So that's about casting. Yeah, I'm sorry, we were just having a power cut. So, anyways, luckily we completed this on time, right? So, as I promised, I mentioned that, yeah, yeah, yes, there is a problem. We just refresh the page. Okay, so this is in brief about the casting defects and all. And as I said, I'll be giving you the table. Or we'll do one thing, I'll just make a video, I'll shoot a recorded video pertaining to the same, and then we'll try to post it on YouTube, right? So the various, all that were discussed so far, we'll briefly make a table, the causes of various kinds of casting defects, and how to overcome those casting defects, right? And you'll have a recorded video soon, right? So this is in brief about casting defects, right? You have any queries or any questions, you can comment. I hope I'm audible, right? So I'm using my mobile data now. Right. So you have any questions, I'll stay for another 5 to 10 minutes. You can shoot your questions. Tower looks. You're welcome, Preeti. Neil Nandan, you're welcome. Multiple choice questions, yes, we have a lot many multiple choice questions to discuss. Because casting defects per se, we have a lot many, we can have a lot many questions. So we'll just do some sample multiple choice questions. So they can ask you like back pressure porosity is mainly because of, localized shrinkage porosity is mainly because of, or you can have a multiple choice question on what would be the relation between, I mean, if the thickness of pattern is increased, distortion increases, decreases, right? You can have such question, and the relation between setting expansion and distortion. So we can have a lot many multiple choice questions on the causes, right? Or especially on the causes, and what should be the casting pressure, ideal range, and what should be the casting duration. And also like we can have questions on influence of liquid powder ratio on various casting defects, pickling, agents for pickling, and suckback porosity, angulation of sprue, and where should a sprue be attached, why do we provide a reservoir, right? So sprue is generally attached at the thickest portion of a wax pattern, and remember the thickness of the sprue has to be equal to the minimum thickness of a sprue which we are going to attach on a wax pattern has to be equal to the thickest portion of the wax pattern. For example, you have this sprue being attached here, right? So the thickness has to be minimum or equal to that of the thickest portion of wax pattern. So you have the thickest portion of wax pattern either in the cusp tip areas or either in the marginal ridge areas, right? So that thickness has to be carried to the sprue. So that would be the sprue thickness, right? And regarding the angulation of sprue, as I mentioned, it has to be a glancing angle, that is around 45 degrees, right? I hope I'm audible, right? I mean, can you get me? Is the live still going on? I think it is going on. I mean, are you having any interruption? Shruti, we lost power. I mean, I lost power, and not me. House. Okay, I'm audible. Fine, thank you. And Yeah, and also the distance between, if you're trying to invest two or three wax patterns simultaneously, the distance, the minimum distance 3 mm, right? So you can expect, and I've seen few multiple choice questions, and also the distance between the wax pattern and the surface of a casting ring, it has to be a minimum of 6 mm or even less. Sorry, it has to be a maximum of 6 mm or even less than 6 mm. Distance between two wax patterns has to be 3 mm, right? And surface discoloration of casting is mainly attributed to sulfur, carbon residues, right? So another question here. What are chill set sprues? What is the gauge size of the sprue that is used? Another question there. What would be the location of localized shrinkage porosity? And what would be the location of suckback porosity? We discussed that previously, right? And the relation between sprue thickness, sprue length, melt temperature, mold temperature in causing different types of porosities. We have a table here, table 12.3 in page 345. I've seen one or two questions here, right? So mainly focus on causes. I mean, once you understand why you have a particular casting defect, then it will be easy for you to answer. I mean, in general, we have questions from these areas, right? Again, we'll do more multiple choice questions. Of course, we'll do separate session if necessary on multiple choice questions pertaining to casting defects, right? And Sairaj, you say? Yeah, chill set sprues. Porosity in denture based resins, Sairaj. Porosity in denture based resins, I mean, that's a different, doesn't come under casting, right? Okay, so can you say chill set sprue? It's nothing but, see, for example, you're having a single unit wax pattern, you'll attach one sprue, right? But if you have a long span or multiple unit wax pattern, then what happens is the molten alloy may not enter into all the wax patterns, I mean, all the mold spaces, right? In long span bridge, if you have multiple units, right? So yeah, multiple sprues. Good, you're right, Preeti. So when you have these multiple sprues attached, the reason why we're attaching multiple sprues at different locations of a long span wax pattern is so that it dissipates heat efficiently and also makes sure that the premature solidification is there within the sprues but not on the surface of casting, or else you can have localized shrinkage porosity as I've shown you in the image, right? So chill set sprues, for this we'll use multiple sprues of thickness 18 gauge, right? So 18 gauge thickness is used, right? So that's chill set sprues. As the name itself indicates, they're used for chilling. In the sense, they eliminate heat, right? And also help in eliminating this porosity, localized shrinkage porosity, right? Cyrus, denture-based resin porosity is something that's related to the powder-liquid ratio, air bubble incorporation, or if you are using a heat cure resin, even during processing errors, you can have porosities, right? You have n number of reasons for it. And what we're discussing today is casting. In the sense, we convert a wax into a metal. So that's casting, right? So Cyrus, you'll have that topic in your second year dental materials itself, right? So once you just see, we have our lab here also. You all can go to our lab, just observe the wax patterns and all. It will be easy for you, right? Or you just meet me, I'll just take you to our lab, right? Yeah, you're welcome, Sukanya. Premature solidification means, see, when alloy, for example, here is my pen, yeah. See, this is your mold space, right? The hand. The pen is your sprue attachment. So what's our requirement? The molten alloy should enter into the entire mold space and replace the entire wax with molten alloy, right? So if at all there is premature means solidifying before the entire molten alloy enters into the mold space. That is premature. Solidification has to happen, right? But if the solidification occurs before the molten alloy fills up the entire mold space, we call it as premature solidification. And because of this premature solidification, we have this slim, the mnemonic slim, right? Localized shrinkage porosity and microporosities, right? You're welcome, Bernice. And Bernice, I know you will not be satisfied with my answer, but that's a fact, right? So maybe when I get time, when I get adequate time, and after all this hectic schedule, I'll definitely probe into some issues, right? As you said, I'll definitely go into the detail of this, like what exactly is happening, what is this nucleation, solidification. Also, as I mentioned, personally, I have this. I mean, I have this. I just want to find out the exact mechanism of cold welding. Cold welding, they simply say when you apply pressure, interatomic distance decreases and there will be welding at room temperature. But once you go probe into detail, it's given like it's beyond the scope. So, right. So, certain things it's better to know less. That's my opinion. Anyways, if you're really interested, you can just probe deeper and it will definitely give you more understanding of the subject, right? Minimum distance, yeah, you can have Neil. You're asking me or you're telling me? Neil? Yeah, Bernice. Bingo. 3 mm, right? The minimum distance between two, it's not the sprues. It's not the sprues we're talking about. The minimum distance between two wax patterns. Sprue is attached to wax pattern, right? The minimum distance between two wax patterns has to be 3 mm. Or else what happens is, as it's mentioned, the wax expands greater than the, I mean, if they're closer, since the wax expands greater, the investment material between can break away, right? So to prevent that, the minimum distance has to be 3 mm. So any questions still? Right. So it'll definitely come up with more multiple choice questions and a recorded version of the same topic, right? We'll just discuss a table over there, right? So hope this session is of some use to all of you, and glad that you all joined me live. So again, tomorrow and day after tomorrow, we're going to have live sessions early in the morning, and I will announce the topic for my discussion on WhatsApp and Facebook, right? So again, see you all tomorrow morning, right? So keep smiling. Yeah, I'm audible. Thanks, Kalsang. Thank you. Right then. So we'll just take a leave. So goodbye, good night, right? So take care, keep smiling, and we'll see you tomorrow with multiple choice questions discussion at 5 a.m. Why expansion occurs? What expansion? I mean, what expansion are you talking about? Yeah, you're welcome, Ashi. You're welcome, Sairaj. Yeah, good night. Say, in case you have more questions, you can mail us at proudtobedentist@gmail.com, right? I'm sweating like hell. Right? So hope you can understand, right? And see you tomorrow morning, right? For any queries, you can mail us at proudtobedentist@gmail.com. I'll just answer this one question by Nikhil. Nikhil says, how to control thermal expansion? Thermal expansion of? I didn't get you. Thermal expansion of? Anyways, right? So just mail me the question, Nikhil. I'll answer it, right? Okay, Vinayak, bye. So bye all of you.